Hi, everyone. My name is Holly Hughes, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at BAI. Thank you for joining us for today's BAI webinar sponsored by Alkami, Reimagine Your Back Office, Why Employee Experience Matters in Digital Banking. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to review a few housekeeping items. If you have difficulties on your end today, please know that a recording of today's webinar will be sent out to view on demand. And if disruption happens on our end, we'll work to resolve it as quickly as possible. We'll be using the polling feature during today's webinar. Note that you will not see the polling question if you're viewing the module in the full screen mode, so we ask that you go ahead and minimize the module so that you can participate in the poll when that comes up. We'll be concluding this webinar with a question and answer period, so at any time during the discussion, feel free to type a question in that Q&A box that you see there on the right hand of your screen, and we will be answering those questions. Also, at the end of today's webinar, you'll see an online evaluation on your screen. Your feedback is really important to BAI as we strive to address the key issues impacting the industry, especially in today's dynamic business environment. So we do ask that you take a few minutes when you see that come up to complete the survey. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in. BAI hosts a series of executive roundtables for financial services industry leaders. During several of these peer discussions, we've heard that acquiring and retaining talent continues to be a top concern and challenge. This was identified as a top business challenge as well in our recent BAI Banking Outlook research. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with two thought leaders who will share more about how digital banking can play a critical role in improving employee user experience. Brian Avery is the Chief Technology Officer for Star Financial Bank. He's responsible for driving the planning, implementation of Star's technology stack, development of their digital and payment strategies, and overseeing information security. Prior to banking, he provided IT services to state and local governments. Brian, it's great to have you with us today. And we also have Jacob Leick. He currently serves as Manager of Business Product Management. He leads a team of former commercial bankers whose passion for easy-to-understand commercial banking products fuels Alkami's production or development efforts. Prior to joining Alkami, Jacob spent more than 7 years in product management at Capital One. Jacob, great to have you with us as well. Really looking forward to our conversation here today. So let's go ahead and get started. First question, I'll start with you, Brian, and then Jacob, see if you have some comments as well. You know, customers and employees, you know, definitely both have great expectations when it comes to technology. We'd love your perspective on, you know, how has technological frustrations impacted the employee experience? And has this impacted employee turnover as well as you've seen from your perspective? Brian, do you want to share some thoughts with us there?
Yeah, I think most organizations have moved customer experience to the forefront of their digital strategy in the last few years, but far too few really have focused on employees. I know for Star, you know, this was something a couple of years ago that we actually incorporated into our IT strategic plan. Because at a corporate level, we want to attract and retain the best talent. And so we recognize that, you know, the experience that we deliver as an employer is really critical to that. And with the amount of technology that our employees use today, if they're using a system that's not enjoyable, that's going to make their overall employment with us less enjoyable. So, you know, when you have to deal with such a competitive labor market like we've seen in the last couple of years, it's really hard to attract and retain that talent. So you want to make sure that you can do everything that you can to keep your high performers. And I think the reality is that those high performers are the ones that are going to be the most impacted by, you know, a system that hinders their ability to be productive. I think the other thing for us is just recognizing that there's a downstream effect when you have a good employee experience, right? That leads to a good customer experience as well. And so, you know, if we're enabling our frontline staff with really great tools, that's going to position them to provide that excellent customer experience, you know, that we're striving for. I think the biggest challenge, especially in the banking industry, is just that so much of the software that we use internally is just not focused on a good user experience. And there's too many companies that aren't willing to put the commitment in research and development to overhaul those systems and make them more usable. So, you know, in a good example, one of the biggest frustrations that we hear from our bankers is just access to systems. we're a bank, and obviously, as bankers, we're very focused on risk management, and so we don't want to give out more access than we need to. And a lot of times we find ourselves dealing with applications or systems that don't allow the granularity that we need to be able to roll out broad access to a system to our frontline staff. And we struggle with that with our digital banking platform. And so we kind of hindered our frontline retail bankers and their ability to get in and manage the customer's experience in our platform. And so one of the things we really liked about Alkami when we moved to that platform was it allowed us to open that up so that our frontline bankers can get in and they can do more with our digital banking platform because we see them as educators and we see a need for them to be able to teach our customers, and we need to enable them to do that. So those are some of the frustrations that we've had as it pertains to being able to deliver a really great employee experience.
Yeah, it's a really great point. I think so often we talk about the customer experience, which is certainly really important with digital, but not as much as talked about in terms of how the employees engage with it. But you've raised some really great points, and especially in this tight talent market that we have, really, really relevant. Jacob, anything else that you would add?
Not very much. I think Brian did a great job there, but yeah, to me, there is definitely a direct tie between the employee experience and the customer end user customer experience. I think a lot of times as a technology company, Alkami and our peers always focus on end user customer experience within the application, and in many cases do a great job there, but fail to understand the direct tie between the employee experience and customer experience. And it's just human nature. I think we want to please those around us. We want to do a good job, and especially high performers, they really thrive on that. And anything that makes it very difficult for them to have access to answer the questions as they're coming in very quickly, it kind of slows things down over time. It kind of, builds a general kind of frustration. So, yeah, I totally agree, Brian. I think well put.
Great. So let's dig in a little bit more. And certainly that customer user experience, as we talked about, is really key to growth. But employee user experience, essential for success overall. You need to have both sides, working really well together. Would love to know, and Jacob, I'll direct this one to you. What are some steps that banks and credit unions can take to simplify their digital banking processes and streamline their back-end user experience?
Well, I think the first and most important thing from my perspective is focus, and really understanding what pain point, like what areas should we as an organization focus on. So it really depends on what's important to you. I think some trends that we've seen is definitely minimizing the risks associated with human error, especially in the area of payments. So anywhere where you have to manually type out payment instructions into a system, straight through processing is kind of key there. The other thing is anytime that it potentially impacts revenue generation, whether that be existing clients onboarding new non-interest income generating functionality, or just onboarding new clients at all. I think the key first is identifying the areas to focus. So trends are revenue generation and minimizing risks, and then objectively evaluating all the different opportunities across the organization for streamlining and kind of automation. Really looking at them, because, like, for example, if your goal is to save time, for example, you could look at something that's done on a monthly basis and it takes 5 hours and it's so painful, and the employee has to do this, absolutely hates it. Or you can look at something that only takes 5 minutes but it's done 20 times a day. And so when you multiply, that's 100 minutes a day, multiply that by the number of business days in the month, and ultimately you have something that's far more painful to the organization as a whole than that 5-hour task. So once you identify the important things, then you kind of objectively identify the key areas to focus. And when you do it like that, you can really, maximize the impact of your efforts in automating things. So in our experience in, working with financial institutions, there's a few different areas that we've seen kind of come up as areas of focus. And so what we've actually done is put them in a poll. And so we like for the audience to kind of look at these and identify the areas that are, most important to them for automation, and we can guide the conversation on that area.
Great. Yeah, so we asked the audience to go ahead and select, where do you think your financial institution has the most opportunity for improvement with automation? ACH processing, wire processing, new user onboarding, monthly billing, ongoing business maintenance. Those are your options. And Brian and Jacob, it looks like most people are selecting new user onboarding. Also, close, I guess pretty close answers then in terms of 2 and 3, ongoing business maintenance, and then wire processing. So thank you so much. We can go ahead and pull that down. Brian, would love your thoughts. You're very close to this work. Looks like a lot of people are focused on that or see the need with that new user onboarding. Does that surprise you at all, or any comments on what the audience just responded with in the poll?
No, I mean, I think that's right in line with what what we struggle with and what other banks that I talk with are struggling with. It's really how do we get that seamless, easy onboarding, right? So that I can open my account, I can get my debit card, I get my online banking, the mobile app, all of those things that happen very quickly and easily, while still managing the risks around KYC and things like that. And we're checking those boxes to be compliant. And I think the other thing too is just trying to find, obviously we're talking about employee experience. I think making sure that you're not delivering a digital account opening or onboarding experience that's better than your in branch, right? That you're making your bankers kind of jump through hoops to get employees set up. But if the customer just goes online, it's more automated. That's one of the things that we're trying to work on now, is how do we better align those two experiences. So whether you come into a branch, whether you're calling our call center, or you're doing something digitally, that it's a seamless and consistent experience.
Great, thanks, Brian. So let's go ahead and dig in a little bit more to the benefits in terms of what you've seen. Would love to know, what you see in terms of the main benefits with digital banking automation. How can automation alleviate the complexity of digital banking that we've talked about, and really ultimately free up employees to focus on that higher value project? Jacob, you mentioned, different ways to look at that time and opportunity costs there. Brian, would love, we'll start with you, and then Jacob, would love to get your thoughts there in terms of digging into those benefits a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we really see, automation as a catalyst, right? So that the workforce that we have today, we have a lot of manual processes, and, our strategy is not to necessarily reduce staff, it's to upskill and kind of convert team members from what they're doing today to something that's driving a little more value, right? Let's get rid of the repetitive tasks that don't require someone to make a decision, right? If we're just, clicking around on a screen, we can automate those things, and then we can reallocate that very valuable resource, which is our people, to do different things. For us, like our payments team is a key area of focus. We recognize that we need to take on new payment rails, right? There's new, faster ways of sending money that are on the horizon. And so, leveraging our digital banking platform and other tools to automate some of those processes gives us, allows us to build some headspace within that team to take on those other channels. I think the other thing is just, it comes down to scalability. I think the pandemic and PPP and some of those things have taught banks that there are instances where you may need to be able to take on a lot more than what you had in the past. I think we all want to continue to grow. And so, I always try to challenge my team of, what if we needed to grow 30% in 90 days? can we scale to that? How painful is that? And if the answer is we couldn't do it, then we need to start looking at what are those constraints. Why can't we do that? Because ultimately automation is going to make that question a lot easier, right? You can scale up a lot better if you've digitized and automated your processes.
For sure, yeah, and love hearing that you're, staying ahead of that. I think, so much had to happen very quickly during the pandemic, and, hopefully we never see something exactly like that, that abrupt, shift, but love that you're forward thinking and that, the other things will be happening, and how can you continue to be nimble and agile and react in a positive way, very quickly. Jacob, would love, any additional thoughts that you have on the benefits.
I think it's easy for people to get kind of scared of automation and, think of laying off, staff or whatever. I think the important thing though is to really focus on value and kind of scalability and focus on, what those kind of employees could be doing. And a lot of times that's very similar, it's like kind of tangential to what they're doing today. It just can be focused on, things that add a lot more value, like revenue generation type of things, or, deepening relationships. Before, digital banking, was absolutely critical. You can say pre-pandemic, the primary benefit of, community banks and why businesses and consumers chose to bank, with community banks is that kind of relationship that they're able to have, with their clients. And I think there's definite ways to do that, and in the digital space, and eliminating a lot of tedious, manual, unnecessary things, just creates more opportunity for that.
Definitely. I think would love to, next question, talk a little bit more about best practices. So our audience definitely, loves to understand best practices and what you're seeing out there. And Jacob, I'll start with you on this one and then go to Brian. So would love, from your perspective, what are some best practices when designing new platform processes to make sure that they're optimized for automation and these new ways of working?
Yeah, from my perspective, number one is discovery. So identifying the problem that you're trying to solve, whatever new capability you're building, and it's then basically becoming obsessed about it, immersing your team, within the environment where that problem exists, whether that be a back office or going on site with a business who's submitting large payments, or whatever it is, but kind of immersing yourselves in that environment to understand the perspective of the users when they're experiencing that problem or that challenge. And I think just that alone allows you to think about the problem very differently, and think about the solution very differently as well. And you can really focus your efforts on eliminating all the pain associated with that. But it's very difficult, and oftentimes it's very easy to miss the mark if you become kind of blinded by your own experience, or preconceived notions about the way that the experience needs to behave. It's very easy to miss the mark there.
Sure. Brian, what would you add in terms of best practices?
I mean, I think what Jacob said around just, he used the word problem, right? I think the biggest thing is to make sure that you are addressing the problem at hand. For us, one of the things we always try to do is say, hey, number one, do we need to do the process that we're trying to automate, right? Does this need to exist? And then, if we say, well, yeah, we think so, right, there's a problem there, then you back into what the process should be based on how you need to solve the problem, right? Because automating a bad process is still a bad process. So I think every time you go through and you're automating something, it's an opportunity to enhance the process, make it as good as it can be, and then you automate that kind of most efficient version.
Yeah, I think there's the bumper sticker or the meme, I guess. Automating a bad process is still a bad process. So I think something, great to keep in mind. And there's certainly, a lot to consider when working with digital banking providers. Would love, Brian, from your experience, and then Jacob also, in terms of how you're working with clients, would love to know what are some key elements that bankers should consider when they're partnering with a digital banking provider. Brian, do you want to start us off with what you've been looking at when you're doing this work directly?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of technical stuff I think you want to make sure that you check the box on, right? So, talking about what kind of infrastructure do they use, right? Are they a cloud first model? Do they have things like high availability, and how is that implemented? Because the reality is that things will break, things will go down, and so I think you need to evaluate their ability to keep your services up when those type of things happen, right? That's kind of a foundational thing to make sure that you do. But sometimes I think banks don't maybe involve the right people. I think it's good to get your infrastructure folks on these calls, when you're doing interviews and things like that, just to talk through some of the really technical stuff and get them to sign off and say, yeah, this makes sense, just from that foundational standpoint. But I always want to understand what's their roadmap, how good are they at hitting the dates that they have on the roadmap. So if they tell me that a feature is going to be available in the second quarter, how likely is that to be true? Because I think we know that being able to get new features and functionality released to our customers is critical. And so when you're partnering with someone like that, you're not choosing to kind of build your own. You're really reliant on their ability to execute on the roadmap and what they choose to put on that roadmap. If they're not doing any kind of big, significant changes, then maybe they're not the right partner. But I think, ultimately the biggest thing, I think the thing to kind of remember is that, especially when it comes to a digital banking provider, you're not buying a product. You're looking for a partnership. And so, evaluating the culture, making sure that they're as passionate about what they do as you are, that they're passionate about your customers. I think, I would never partner with a digital banking provider without a site visit, right? Let me see how the sausage is made, and make sure that what the sales folks are telling me, drives with what I see with the actual team. Because, if they could have the best technology in the world, if they don't have good people to help you use it, to implement it, to support it, then it's not going to be a good experience for you. So I think that cultural fit and making sure that you find someone that is really passionate about what they do is critical.
Yeah, those are some great points, Brian. And I think, I love that, you go deeper than I think a lot of people do in looking at that fit. It's a really big decision. So I think you've mentioned some really important things that folks on the line can consider as they're vetting opportunities. Jacob, anything else that you would add?
Yeah, but first, Brian hit the nail on the head. Totally agree with everything that he's saying. And, things like reliability, ability to hit the roadmap, those are, absolutely critical, number one, types of items. But maybe I'll add to the third piece that you really talked about partnership. And from my perspective, I think, what you want to look for is one, a focus on, solving real problems, not just building anything. And then number two, and this is probably the most important from my perspective, is a willingness and ability to respectfully challenge the institution and accept challenges from the institution. Being on the technology company side currently, I can tell you that us being challenged by institutions and us challenging them back, that ultimately is where the best ideas come from. That's what kind of pushes things forward. And so if you find yourself working with someone who's just an order taker, ultimately that erodes kind of the quality of the product over time. And so you should really look for someone that is like Brian's saying, very passionate about their product and willing to work with you on changes and doing things in a way that ultimately benefit both of you.
That's great. So we've got about 5 minutes left, 5, 6 minutes. So one more question, and then we'll do a little bit of Q&A. And again, you all are doing really important work. Brian within your organization, Jacob working with lots of different types of financial services organizations, and would love for you to share. You shared some great advice with that last question, but any other words of wisdom that you would like to share with the audience? Brian, I'll start with you, then Jacob. If you could offer just one additional piece of advice to banks and credit unions about employee retention, business effectiveness, what would that be?
I think it's just making sure that you're having these discussions about employee experience. If you have a strategic planning group or with your senior leadership, I think it needs to be a priority. And I think it makes sense to call that out somewhere in your strategic plan. The only other thing I'll add is just engagement. So one of the things that we've done is we created a program called Digital Insiders. And so we have employees throughout the company that are part of a group that meets monthly. We do some in-person workshops with them, and they help us do system testing as we do different releases. They also provide feedback, and we use them kind of as a sounding board as we're thinking about, what roadmap items do we want on our tech roadmap, and building some relationships throughout the organization so that we get candid feedback. Because I think that feedback from the employees on the employee experience, but also the customer experience is really, really critical. So just engaging at all levels of the organization, even if it's just, doing branch visits or sitting with other groups, I think that's really critical.
That's great. Jacob, any final words of wisdom you'd want to share with the audience?
Sure. Yeah, I would say, create a culture of, client obsession, your end user obsession, and empower your frontline staff to, solve problems and essentially get out of their way and celebrate success. To me, that then creates kind of a perpetual cycle that ultimately leads to, happiness, for your clients and for your employees.
That's great. Great advice. Appreciate you guys sharing that. So before we head into Q&A, would like to encourage everyone to take a few minutes to fill out that survey that's going to be popping up on your screen here. We really do value that feedback, so appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us. So I think we've got time for just one question. And if we don't get to your question, those of you who are on the line, we will send some follow-up information to you individually. So appreciate everyone being here. But the one question I did want to ask, and I think this is something that we hear a lot in our executive roundtables and just comes up in BAI thought leadership, is this connection between human connections and the digital space. So the question is, how can organizations have meaningful conversations with customers and make human connections in this digital space? Brian, maybe I'll start with you on that one and then give you the last word, Jacob.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we always try to say is that, our digital experiences need to still embody our core values, right? So whether I go into a branch or I'm on our website or I'm using our mobile app, that experience should feel like STAR to our customers. So I think that's one of those ways that you retain that human connection, even though there's not necessarily a human involved, right? Because a human has designed that process in a way to elicit a certain emotion. I think the other thing is just allowing customers to engage with us through those digital channels. We leverage Glia to do that, so we can embed chat and video within our digital delivery, and we think that's really critical because it allows you to very easily shift from self-service digital to now talking or doing a video chat with a banker without ever really having to leave that channel.
Great. Jacob?
I fully 100% agree with Brian. I think it was a perfect answer in the exact areas where I would have focused on. So.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well done. We're right up against time. Again, if we didn't get to your question, we will send some follow-up information to you. But Brian, Jacob, thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise with us today and for the good work you're doing. This is so important to both the employee experience, as we've talked about today, as well as that great customer experience. And thanks to all of you for joining. I know it's busy times for everyone, so we appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. A reminder, as a follow-up to today's session, you will receive an email from BAI within 24 hours ours that will include a link to the webinar recording. We encourage you to share that with your team, with other colleagues who you think would benefit from this conversation. And you can learn more about this topic and other key issues on our website, which is bai.org. This concludes our session. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.